The Shirt by Jennifer Anderson. She was cleaning out the closet, looking for items to give to Goodwill, when she found it. It was balled up in the back of the top shelf and had sat collecting dust for how long? 8 years? 9? At least since they've moved into the house and Will was a baby. It was Ted's old shirt from his single days, part of his going out outfit that he thought was so retro hip and cool, but which was really just fugly. That was a term she'd learned from Ted himself, along with soup sandwich and foobar, back when he'd just left the army. He was a kid from South Dakota who didn't have a clue what was fashionable, who thought parachute pants were in style at least a decade after they'd been branded as a renegade relic of the 80s. And really, how could he have expected to know what was stylish? Growing up, his mom bought all his clothes at Walmart, the only place within 50 miles that sold anything other than Wranglers and Carhartts. He joined the Army at 18 and basically never wore anything but uniforms after that. When she first met him, he had no idea how to dress himself for civilian life, a fact pretty much summed up by this shirt. It was mustard colored, with huge paisleys that looked more like hideous amoebas than a design element. It was 100% cotton that felt rough and stiff. It wrinkled like crazy. God, he must have spent hours ironing this thing, she thought, as she fingered the now faded fabric. She remembered that he'd worn it when they went to the Green Hill once early in the dating days, how he'd slyly checked himself out in the car window as they headed out. She remembered, too, how he'd pull her close late that night. The heat and the noise of the club disappeared as he drunkenly whispered in my ear, "I'm with the prettiest girl in the place." His grin was lopsided and sweet, and her breath hitched as he spoke. How drawn to him she was to him. God-awful shirt and all. It wasn't until months after that night, when they were firmly established as a couple and practically living together, that she finally gave him grief about the shirt. "Oh, the bloom is really off the rose now," he'd say, smiling. He'd still pull it out occasionally, putting it on despite her groans and protests, not caring a bit how ridiculous he looked. She knew he wore it just to get a rise out of her, to establish himself as a still independent guy, despite the fact that he'd happily let her replace most of his wardrobe by then. Then, one day, when he was at work and she was home with her first son, she'd come across it while searching for something to wear that wasn't yet stained with Will's spit up. Nothing of hers fit yet, and the shirt was lurking toward the back like an embarrassing drunk who won't leave the party. She had yanked it off its flimsy wire hanger and thrown it up in the top shelf heap with a disgruntled grunt. Now, this artifact from another life was in her hands. She's still just as awful as she remembered. She started to toss it into the Goodwill pile, but stopped. It was precious. This obscenely ugly shirt. She smiled to herself as she folded it carefully into a tiny square, stepped back to gather momentum, and launched it up to the darkest reaches of her closet.